Kukicha is a Japanese stem tea made from the stems and leaves of the tea plant. This tea is lower in caffeine, higher in minerals, and it has a very distinct flavor to it. In this video, we're going to be preparing some Kukicha tea and seeing what we notice in the taste. Let's get started. Okay, so today we're going to be brewing the Kukicha Sakamoto. So this is a stem tea made by Mr. Sakamoto in Shibushi. And normally Mr. Sakamoto focuses in the production of gyokuro tea. So this is a premium shade-grown tea from Japan. But in addition to that, he also produces a gyokuro kukicha and a gyokuro karagane. So if you compare this to the karagane, which is a very similar tea, one of the things you'll notice is that there's more of a stem to leaf ratio here, a higher stem to leaf ratio rather. So there's going to be more of these yellow stems compared to the green leaves than you would say see in the karagane, for example. So this leads to a different flavor, different caffeine content, different nutrient profile of the Kukicha Sakamoto versus the Karagane Sakamoto. So we're going to go ahead and put in 5 grams in the Kyushu teapot. For this I'm going to be using the black Tokoname Kyushu. So this is a really nice kind of partially glazed, you can hear here it's like a little bit rough, the surface, this is really good for a lot of different teas, but particularly, teas like gyokuro actually, because it's going to kind of accentuate some of the notes of the tea and actually smooth out the flavor a little bit. So let's go ahead and put the 5 grams of leaves in. Try to make sure that we don't spill too much. And then what I'm going to do is put in 140 degrees, so 60 degrees Celsius water in here. And you can definitely go warmer with Kukicha, but I don't want to push it too much. I don't want it to be too bitter. So I'm going to be using 60 degrees Celsius, which is what you would use for a gyokuro tea, for example. I tend to like teas a little bit cooler because I don't like a whole lot of this dryness or astringency that comes out of the tea. So what you'll notice is this is the same thing with the karagane, but once you add the water in, the leaves are going to float up to the surface right away. And how karagane gets its name is it actually refers to, a species of wild goose. So karagane means wild goose. And there's a story, like a Japanese legend, where the migrating geese would actually rest on pieces of floating driftwood. And the karagane tea, or the stem teas, kind of have this effect where the driftwood, you could say, kind of rises to the top. So this is just something to kind of watch as you're waiting for the tea to brew, and that's where the word karagane comes from, as strange as it sounds. But here we're not talking about the karagane, we're talking about the kukicha. And we're going to kind of compare the flavor of the kukicha versus the karagane. So let's go ahead and put the lid back on. It's been 1 minute. Pour this out. You'll notice a much lighter color compared to like a sencha or a gyokuro. The color is really light, really golden. There are a lot of leaf and stem particles in here, actually. Let's go ahead and take a look at the leaves. So you see they actually got greener in color once they're exposed to the warm water. Go ahead and give a little smell. Yeah, it's really, the floral notes are really coming out in the aroma once you add the water to the leaves. You don't really notice it so much on the dried leaves, but then once you add that water in, there's kind of this explosion of aromas in the teapot. It's really nice. The same thing with the karagane. These are very similar teas, and they both kind of have that characteristic where they're very aromatic, especially the aromas coming off of the wet leaves. Right away, I'm actually getting more umami from this tea than I'm typically used to. I wonder if it's because maybe I used a little bit more leaves, a little bit less water this time. Maybe it's because this is actually gyokuro leaves mixed with stems. So the leaves in here are gyokuro leaves, so it's not atypical to have that kind of savory gyokuro flavor but normally it's a little more nuanced, it's a little more balanced. Today I'm getting quite a bit of it. So it's very sweet, very savory. Normally I don't get so much of this savory note from the tea. Normally it's more on the floral side, a little bit more on the fruity side. But that's kind of part of the fun of tea, is it's a little bit different every time you brew it. So today I'm getting more of that umami. I think it's got that kind of sweet melon flavor. Yes, I think the sweetness is kind of this cantaloupe melon, definitely like a warmer sweetness. I'm getting some of the minerality. I expect I'll get more minerality in the next brewing and the brewing after that, which typically happens. I'm not really getting too much of this kind of floral note that I usually experience with this tea. So as I'm finishing this up, I'm going to brew it a second time. For this I'm going to use the same temperature water, but this time I'm going to be using a much shorter brewing time. So instead of a full minute, I'm going to be brewing it for 20 seconds. And you can see the stems float to the top right away. Once again, last few sips of this tea here. Very good, very sweet. I've been drinking this tea for a while and it still surprises me. So one day it's floral, one day it's has more minerality, and the next day I get this really savory umami flavor. You can see the seconds I spilled a little bit here. I'll clean that up later. But this is much greener, as you can see here. A little bit more leaf particles. I'm curious to see what the second steeping is like. Much more subtle, a little bit more dry. I am getting more of this flowery. Let's see if I can get it from the leaves here. Yep, the kind of like the flowery, more perfumey aromas are coming out of the tea. Definitely in the wet leaves, a little bit in the tea itself. A little bit more minerality, a tiny bit more acidity maybe. A little bit of this steamed vegetable flavor. Yeah, just slightly drier with more minerals. This is more what I'm used to from this tea, kind of slightly drier, floral flavor and aroma, more minerality, and not so much sweetness. Today we got a little bit of a surprise. The first brewing was much sweeter than it usually is, and now you're kind of getting the typical flavor more in the second brewing rather than the first. But this tea is good. It's actually quite low in caffeine, so you can kind of drink it in the afternoon like I'm doing. Normally I cut the caffeine off at around 4 p.m., but for this tea you can go a little bit longer, particularly with the second and third brewing, because most of the caffeine ends up in the first brewing, the second and third significantly less. So I'm going to brew this for 20 seconds, see if I can get this stem out. Go ahead and pour this out. Try not to spill this time. Very interesting on the color, because the first brewing was very golden yellow, the second brewing was much greener, and now we're going back to that golden yellow color, which is pretty unusual actually. Usually it gets green and then kind of stays green for the second or the third. It's more of like a nutty aroma coming from the leaves. It's still a little bit flowery, but I almost get like almonds or something, like sweet almond from the leaves. So the flavor here, much more minerality. It seems like you're kind of, with each brewing, stripping away layers from this tea. So the first brewing was very sweet, and that sweet and umami flavor kind of overpowered the brewing. And then that was stripped away in the second brewing, second infusion, which has more of these floral notes, more of this dryness, more of this kind of maybe even more citrusy flavor. And then that gets stripped away and finally you get into just the minerality of the tea. So this is typical with the third brewing. It's all that's kind of left, if you will, is like the minerals of the tea, kind of the physicality of the tea. So, does it dry out the palate? Does it kind of create this tingling sensation on the palate from the minerals? The third brewing, you're not getting as much of these perfumey flavors as you did with the first, or as the second one. You're not getting as much of the sweetness with the umami flavors you got with the first brewing. You're really getting into the physicality of the tea. So this is this was a nice kind of session here because you're able to appreciate all the different aspects of the tea, the sweetness, kind of like the higher notes, the more perfumey top notes, and then also the physicality. So I would definitely recommend, if you're not doing it already, to take the tea for multiple infusions because you're going to learn a little bit more about it each time. It's kind of like you're seeing different angles of the tea. You're seeing it in different lighting almost. If you really want to get to know a tea, you have to brew it multiple times, and it might even help to get a journal out and kind of write down what you notice with each infusion, because each infusion is going to be different. But over time, you're really going to understand the tea if you brew it multiple times. So thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to pick up some of the Kukicha Sakamoto, you can find it on our website. You can also find the Karagane Sakamoto, very similar tea. I would say that the flavor of the Karagane is much sweeter because you have more of these leaves and less of the stems. The caffeine content is going to be a little bit higher, and I would say it works much better as a cold brew, whereas this one's a little bit drier, a little bit more citrusy, and has more of these floral notes to it. So whichever one you prefer, we would really appreciate it if you could support the channel by trying some delicious tea and then also subscribing as well. So thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.